Hey, everybody. Before we get started, just wanted to remind you all that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on the $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. And when the game's over, roll on down to the online casino, play some blackjack, some poker, unwind with over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. The NBA never ceases to disappoint, ladies and gentlemen. Late last night, we got news of a big trade. September 27th, the day that it all goes down. Apparently, that was the same day that Damian Lillard got traded last year, but that may or may not be accurate. I think I took that from somebody else's tweet. Welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. This is a special breaking news edition. I am Dan Vespris. I'm Dan Vespris on social. You can find our network at Old Man Squad on Twitter and TikTok, Old Man Squad Fantasy on Instagram. Please hit that like button as you settle in to watch the video. Feel free to comment if you feel so inclined. Subscribe and leave a 5-star review. And again, here's the tweet from last night. Shams Charania, the Knicks. Well, there was a first one, but then there was a little bit more data here in the second one. The Knicks are nearing a trade to send package around Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I added the team name for Karl-Anthony Towns. Sources tell Shams and John Krasinski. Not the guy from The Office. And this is a true blockbuster. Two teams sending their number 2 guys for one another effectively in the trade universe. Karl-Anthony Towns, arguably the best offensive player in this deal, probably the best all-around player in this deal for Julius Randle. DiVincenzo, a little bit of depth for Minnesota, and kind of clearing out a little bit of space on the New York Knicks side. But what does it mean? Let's start at the top with, in my estimation, the best player in the deal overall, and that is Karl-Anthony Towns, who averaged 21.8 points, 8.3 boards, 3 assists last year, with particularly poor steals and blocks numbers over the last 2 seasons. And that is really the area that I want to highlight while we talk about Cat. This is unquestionably stellar news for Karl-Anthony Towns because, and almost nothing else matters in this discussion, he gets to go back to playing the center position. The Knicks are notably without a big man that they trust in the middle. Mitchell Robinson went down. They lost Isaiah Hartenstein in the offseason to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They just didn't have a center. They had Jericho Sims, who isn't very good. And now they get not only a center, but a floor spacing one at that. One of the best 3-point shooting big men, if not the best, in the entire NBA. From a strict what is he going to do standpoint, the answer for Cat is probably somewhat similar. Over the last 2 seasons in Minnesota, he took about 15 shots a game while being the number 2 scoring option behind Anthony Edwards. Here in New York, he is behind Jalen Brunson, but probably, I guess we don't know for certain until the season actually plays out, but by all accounts, he's the number 2 scoring option behind Jalen Brunson, ahead of Mikal Bridges, who sits ahead of OG Anunoby. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that the number of field goal attempts for Cat stays roughly the same. He is now the center on offense, but he's not a traditional center where he's going to be banging down low and doing most of his damage around the rim. Even before he shifted over to power forward in Minnesota, and again, you guys that are watching can see this graphic on your screen. Once he started to take a bunch of 3-pointers, the percentage of his shots that came from downtown didn't change all that much. It was around a third. It was a little bit higher over the last 2 seasons, where it was a tiny bit higher than a third of his shots. Although if you go back to 2019, 2020, during that COVID season before, that was a messy year for Cat. That was a season he was taking about 40% of his shots from three-point land. Then it came back down to slightly under a third for 2 years, and then it was back up just a little bit over a third over the last 2. All that to say, the number of three-pointers, once he started jacking them up during that COVID year, that was when he really started hucking from three-point land, the ratio of three-pointers to two-pointers there were slight alterations, but it wasn't based exclusively on what position he was playing on offense. It seemed more like it was just a year-to-year phenomenon. The players around him probably the larger impact on that than whether it was Gobert or not. Also of note, Cat's been a 40% three-point shooter basically his entire career. Took him a couple of seasons to get that part figured out, but for the better part of the last 7 years, he's been 40% or better. He had one blip, not this season, but the previous one, where he was playing hurt, and he was at 37%. Also, slightly of note, over the last 2 seasons, Cat's free throw percent has been a lot better. He's been up at 87%. He's always been good, career 84%er, but more like 83 before the last 2 years. So maybe that holds, maybe it doesn't. Assists is another thing I want to point at. That is always tied to how much he's getting to do with the basketball. So when he was the primary on the Timberwolves, his assists were generally in the 4s. Last year, it got up into the 4s as well, but again, it was sort of a smaller sample size. This year, 3, this past season. And there were many stretches during his career where it was in the 3s. I think that's probably a number that holds as well. So you're like, Dan, why is this such a great thing for Cat if you haven't actually told me anything that's going to be better for him yet? Well, we're getting to that. This is the part that we like. The part that we like about Cat going back to playing center: blocks, steals, and rebounds. He goes back to being the last line of defense, which is not a great thing for the Knicks. But, compared to playing Julius Randle at the 5, you get someone who's a little bit worse at playing position defense, but a little bit taller. That's the difference between those two guys. So 6 of 1, half dozen kind of thing. And the Knicks have so much perimeter defense in Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart when he gets in there, that they hope, I don't really have much of a choice, but to hope that those guys can keep dudes out of the paint. And other teams are probably going to attack Jalen Brunson because he's short. He's small. But for Cat, it doesn't matter if he's good or bad at protecting the rim. By the way, spoiler alert, he's not good. Cat's a bad rim protector. But it doesn't matter if you're just back near the bucket and getting the opportunities to block shots. Ultimately, some little dude is going to get near you, and just being gigantic, Cat's basically a 7-footer. He's listed at 7 feet, 248 on Yahoo. He's just going to get some blocks by being there. As evidenced by the fact that when Cat was playing center full time, he averaged about 1.3 blocks per game. And some of that was like spry rookie Cat. As his legs became a bit more aged, he was still in the 1.1 to 1.3 range. Whereas when Rudy Gobert showed up, and this was a marked and expected shift, the blocks dropped to 0.7. He basically lost half a block a ball game. And I know that doesn't sound like all that much, but a half a block a game over 60 to 80 ball games is a ton, head-to-head or roto. 30 to 40 blocks a season is a big deal. A couple a week is a big deal. Think about how many times you lose blocks by 2 or 3 in a given week. Steals, similar but not that different. They've been at 0.7 the last 2 years. It was 0.7 early in his career. It kind of trended up to about 0.8, 0.9, 1.0 was where he maxed out in that one. But again, just like being forced into the defensive mix more often, which you are as the center, as the last line. Maybe you get somebody's trying to make a pass in the paint. You're the guy that just puts your arms out and gets them in the way. And it might be legitimately like 5 to 10 steals over the course of an entire season, which again, that actually isn't all that much, but it does matter for fantasy purposes. That still is the third most important thing. The second most important was block. Well, I might even argue the first most important was block, but tied 1A and 1B, rebounds. Rebounds and blocks. Typically, field goal percent comes with it, and frankly, it might in New York. I actually don't know. Field goal percent might come with it. But again, Cat takes so many three-pointers that it's kind of like we can't really guarantee that he goes from 50 to 51 or 52. Just assume it stays the same. What you can, I believe, very comfortably handicap is that Cat is going to rebound more and block more this coming season, while basically everything else can stay the same. Let's say, for argument's sake, and like, you know, the funny thing here with New York is like, if OG Anunoby is the guy who slides up to play the 4, Cat is a lot of the rebounding on that club, not named Josh Hart, who might have to slide in and start now. That starting lineup might be Josh Hart at the 2. Brunson, Hart, Bridges, Anunoby, and Cat could very well be the starting 5 for the New York Knicks. Unless they decide they want to go Precious at the 4, OG at the 3, and bring Hart off the bench. I don't really know what other options they could reasonably deploy. Those kind of feel like the only 2 choices. Either way, Josh Hart's going to play a ton of minutes, and he's going to get a bunch of rebounds. This was a good thing for him, and we'll get to Hart in a minute. But in terms of what this means for overall rank, well, it's hard to say. Because if you look at the rank board from 2 years ago, and we can actually pull that up for those that are watching with us here. 2 seasons back, before Rudy Gobert showed up, Cat was number 8 in fantasy on 16.5 shots per game. He averaged 25 points, 10 boards, 2 threes, 3.5 steals, a steal, a block. Sorry, 3.5 assists, a steal and a block on 53-82 splits. He ain't getting 16.5 shots in New York. I don't think it's getting that high. But even at 15, can we make a guess as to where he might get to this year after being like down in the late 30s, early 40s in this current power forward iteration of Karl-Anthony Towns? I don't think he gets all the way back to the first round. Not because I don't think he can get anywhere near these numbers. Like, let's say he gets 15 shots. You're still talking about probably 21 points a game, still around 2 3-pointers because he's so good at them. Near 10 rebounds is not insane. 3 and some odd assists, like 0.8 steals, 1.1 blocks, stuff like that. He could shoot 51% from the field and 86 at the free throw line. Like, the numbers wouldn't be all that far away from where they were 3 seasons back. The difference now is that other guys in the NBA just do more than they did then. There are more guys that have better numbers than that now than there were 3 seasons ago. It feels crazy to think of it that way, but like, think about Steph Curry's season this same year. And I'm showing it on the screen, and we'll just use it as an example. He averaged 25.5 points, 4.5 threes, 5 boards, 6 assists, 1.3 steals was a higher. But the percentages were 44-92 that season, and he was number 6 on a per game basis. Think about what Steph did this season just now. 26.5 points more, 4.8 threes is more. He was down 1 assist and 0.6 steals, and basically everything was better besides that. And he was number 23 per game. Because like a half dozen or more other players in the NBA just ratcheted their fantasy production up to otherworldly numbers. And that's kind of my concern with trying to re-rank Cat. He could put up the numbers he put up pre-Gobert, I'll just call it pre-Gobert. He could get very close to those, but those are no longer late first round numbers. Those are mid-second round numbers. So my expectation for Cat is that this is, first of all, great for him. This past season, he was, with the numbers he was putting up, Karl-Anthony Towns was number 44, add half a block and a couple of rebounds. That doesn't get him all the way back to first round. I think you're probably looking at an early third round guy. So probably between 25 and like 32, give or take a couple on either end of that. But Cat to me is firmly a third round pick this season. I'd be willing to go as high as the end of the second round, but I wouldn't want to go higher because dude hasn't been healthy he's been healthy like one-ish time in the last 4 seasons. And, I don't want to put too many eggs in the he's just hurt now basket, but it does kind of feel like he's just hurt now until he proves to me that he can get back through a full season again. So I would look for Cat again, get him somewhere between 23 and 35 is probably the draft window for him. I think you're probably pricing him out at the front end of that, and you're probably getting a value towards the back end of that. And then anything deeper is lovely. But again, up until last night, you could pretty much just say he was going to do the same thing he did last year, and now you can't say that anymore. The big player going the other direction is Julius Randle, who averaged 24, 9, and 5 last season before he got hurt. Prior year, he was at 25, 10, and 4. More Brunson, less Randle happening was kind of the transition for the Knicks over the last year and change. He probably doesn't get up to 18 shots in Minnesota. He probably just slots right into what Cat was doing this last year, which was 15 and change shots. And maybe that's the upside for Cat. Maybe he can get up to 16 or 17 shots and take Randle's stuff. But I still think that with OG starting the year healthy at least, and Bridges being added in, I don't think there's an 18-shot opening in New York. So maybe that's how Cat gets into the mid-20s instead of the later 20s, is just adding a shot back to the mix. But for Randle, in my estimation, best case scenario is he gets to do exactly what he did in New York, which was already kind of frightening from a fantasy standpoint in that, if he had a bad percentages year, it's horrible. Turnovers is the weakest point for Julius. I know the field goal and free throw are not great, but they're not break your back bad these days. It's the insanely high turnovers. I don't think I'm targeting Randle pretty much anywhere because I think his points, his rebounds, and his assists probably all come down in Minnesota. I don't know that he's playing 35 and a half minutes a game in Minnesota. Obviously the fact that his percentages aren't good means that usage coming down is sort of buttressed by the fact that you get less of the bad stuff too. But for Randle, he's like a punt turnovers guy, even where he was going this past season, and I'm just not really going to target him. Points leagues expect him to take a small step back as well. So I'm not going to give you the exact draft spot in that format. 8 category, I thought he was going in the 60s in 8 cat, and I thought that was perfectly fine. I would target him more in the 70s and 80s in 8 cat, and in 9 cat, I'm not targeting him at all. I don't want a monster turnover guy who no longer has the upside of being sort of like the legacy guy in his old spot. The other players that are impacted by this, in my estimation, are Josh Hart and Donte DiVincenzo. Donte's the one on the move, but I'm less interested in him because he's definitely coming off the bench, and he's definitely not going to have the absurd role that he had at the end of last year. I'm more interested in Josh Hart, who also had a crazy role last year, but is able to do stuff without having the basketball. That's the magic of Josh Hart, is he just needs minutes. He doesn't actually need touches to have fantasy value, because minutes for Hart equated to steals and rebounds, and assists, frankly, and that's where he cashes his ticket. Because the percentages they were bad for him this last year, but typically they're not quite that awful. Free throw was a little better. Field goal was quite a bit worse. So you're not relying on those to float Josh Hart. You're not worried about him hitting a bunch of three-pointers. You only get one last year just by playing 33-plus minutes a game and 40-plus for a while down the stretch. You're counting on Josh Hart to get you a steal. You're counting on Josh Hart to be an absurdly strong rebounding guard-eligible player. He averaged 8 rebounds in Portland pre-trade last year, and then 7 with New York after, and then this past season he was at 8+ for the Knicks, and he's done it before. He did 8 in New Orleans basically a couple of times. And, you got to go all the way back to the Lakers days to find a season when Hart wasn't an elite rebounding guard. And even then he was fine. It just wasn't like his personality yet. That's his personality now. I think the upside for Hart And now I think you can probably advocate a last round pick on Josh Hart just because the minutes opened up, and where before I was like, I don't know how this dude's going to get above 25 minutes, 26 minutes a game with no DiVincenzo around and injury prone Cat and injury prone OG Anunoby nearby. Hart's probably starting at 25, 26 minutes with an opportunity for more. And then if anybody goes down, that's how he really cuts across that big time ad line. So start of the year, you're probably looking at a guy that's going to be posting up value somewhere between 100 and 130, kind of in that doesn't matter zone. But if anyone misses time, literally anybody, Josh Hart now kind of slides into that. We did the one away guys show earlier this week. Josh Hart is kind of a one away guy. He's a serviceable, playable, boring dude when the team is healthy. And if any of the starters sits, maybe besides Brunson, because that's a Deuce McBride 40-minute game incoming. If any other starter or regular sits, then Hart gets whatever it is, 4 or 5. I mean, as many as like 10 extra minutes, because we know Tibbs is perfectly fine playing him 38, 39 minutes in a ball game if they have to. Do you play Hart through the games where he's not getting to do all that much? Games cap roto, probably not. Head-to-head, probably yes. And then you kind of take the good with the bad. But if you drafted him at the end of your draft in roto, you probably leave him on your bench until you see what the beginning of the season looks like. And if it's good, okay, fine. Or you just wait until somebody takes a day off, because ultimately it's going to happen. And the last name I want to talk about on today's show is Donte DiVincenzo, who was already, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but a little bit of a flash in a pan kind of fantasy season last year. He's always had a somewhat translatable fantasy game in that he chucks a lot of threes and he gets steals at a pretty good clip. So that 3-and-D stuff, but it wasn't going to land until all of the usage guys were out of his way. And suddenly he was able to take 15, 20 shots a ball game, and he was hitting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 3-pointers a night and getting multiple steals because he was playing 40 minutes a ball game. And the rebounds went up to 5 or 6 because he was playing 40 minutes in a ball game, and the assists were at 4 because he was, again, playing 40 minutes in a ball game. That ain't happening in Minnesota. You're going to get 20-some-odd minute Donte DiVincenzo. You're going to get Golden State numbers Donte DiVincenzo, which was 26 minutes, 9.5 points, 4.5 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.3 steals, and 2 3-pointers on bad field goal percent, which, by the way, hovers close to fantasy value. He's not a complete afterthought, but he was like number 115 for the Warriors. And in my estimation, that's probably about as good as it's going to get in Minnesota. The way he clears the threshold and becomes an everyday startable fantasy asset is, again, an injury to McDaniels or Anthony Edwards. Because Minnesota's not going to do the weird positionless thing. They have a true point guard in Mike Conley, have the true center in Rudy Gobert. In between, I mean, Julius Randle is going to be playing power forward. And so you've only got like these kind of middle guys of McDaniels and Anthony Edwards that can kind of flip-flop with DiVincenzo, but he's clearly behind those guys. So I don't think, like, maybe he's slide. And Naz Reid also, by the way, floating around with that sort of center power forward profile. So there isn't really a way for him to play up. I guess there's a little bit of a way for DiVincenzo to play down, but he's not going to get point guard minutes. And they've got Rob Dillingham, who's going to be playing some of those minutes. And so when you kind of like mush all the numbers together, it's fuzzy mathing it. I'll admit that. But again, he's not going to get into the 30s in minutes coming off the bench for the Timberwolves. He's going to be doing what the Warriors asked him to do, which was pretty good. And like, if you were punting points, he was quite useful that year. And you guys know me, I love a good punt points season. But, you know, that's the kind of guy that is typically available on waiver wires because most teams aren't punting points. But if you were, he was a decent source of boards, assists, steals, and threes on a punt points roster. So I guess maybe that's the argument. Like, if you're punting points, you could take DiVincenzo in the last round, but also you could take some weird, super big upside punt points guy in the last round. And that's where the scales of justice maybe don't quite balance, in that you could, but might as well take a shot on somebody. You know Dante's maxing out at 100. His best case scenario this year is top 100 as a backup in Minnesota. Unless, again, heaven forbid, McDaniels or Anthony Edwards goes down for a really long stretch of time. That's the way that maybe gets better, because they don't have a ton behind that. I'll float through the roster here. They've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker. That was one of the names that I think I forgot to throw into the mix a few minutes ago. But overall, like, there isn't really an opportunity for him to do more than 26-ish minutes a ball game. And again, that's good enough if you're punting probably points and maybe even field goal percent. He's quite bad there, but doesn't take all that many. I still don't think that I would draft him outside of that kind of team build target for Donte. But that said, this is, and I don't want this to get lost in the shuffle, this is a positive for him because Minnesota needed wing depth in a way that New York really did not. He needed somebody to get hurt in New York to get to that kind of opportunity. And he doesn't in Minnesota. So there's just a little bit more for him there, but I still don't know that it's enough to get him all the way to where I wanted him to be. Quick recap on everything we just talked about. This super big blockbuster, really fun, really exciting stuff. Big winner in this one is Karl-Anthony Towns. Cat moves to, I believe, a full round earlier in where I'd take him in drafts. Julius Randle is pretty much off my board outside of points leagues or I guess 8-cat if he slips in drafts. We'll kind of see what that ADP does over the next week or two. Josh Hart is a possibility as a last round pick if you're hunting rebounds basically and out of a guard position, so sort of out of position stuff. And then DiVincenzo, if you're hunting steals and some threes at the very end of your draft, he does kind of fill in around that. Like if you didn't get Marcus Smart or something, that's probably another opportunity there. So that's your deep dive. This one, as expected, went longer than I expected it to. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Love the NBA because it's crazy. Yes, Mark Williams news also happened. He does not get his own show. I'll just quickly throw it in at the end here. Mark Williams, a strained tendon. Strained or sprained? Make sure you get this right. Strained tendon. I had that right. He's out at least 2 weeks from yesterday, which takes him to October 11th. That's only 11 days from the start of the season. And that's, again, at least 2 weeks. So this is a big downer. We may be taking Mark Williams off of our targets board, but stay tuned. We'll get more information in about 2 weeks, and then we'll have a final call on that. Have your drafts at the last possible second. That's the damn news here. Like, what if you had already drafted someone in this trade? I guess it's a win for you if you took Cat. But this is why I like to draft late. I know sometimes you can catch sleepers sleeping, but do them in that last weekend before the season starts. You don't get caught on a Mark Williams injury or a Devin Vassell injury or a gigantic trade. These things do happen this time of year, and this is another example of it right here. A fun one, a big trade in the NBA. The Knicks get really, really interesting, especially on offense with this one. Cat to the Knicks, Randle to the Timberwolves, and some wings get a little bit more opportunity on playing time. I'm Dan Vespers for Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. See you guys over on social at Dan Vespers and at Old Man Squad. Check out our brand new Instagram and TikTok feeds for the shorts that I've been putting out lately. And again, please do me on Twitter at Dan Vespers. I was already tweeting about this stuff last night. So if you wanted the immediate breakdown, that's the place to get it. Comment if you have any thoughts on other players involved in this, or you agree, you disagree, whatever. That's all fine. Like, rate, subscribe. We'll see you guys tomorrow with an episode of Fantasy 101. Later for now.